Why is recorded in front of a live studio audience.
So you're not on the veranda.
Well, no, I was at the pool, but I left the pool to come home and change in time for our interview.
This is going to be amazing. Are you going to be doing this interview in a bathing suit
Well, no, because if I need to, I'll go back to the pool, go in
and
the
get in the
bathroom.
water? Oh,
I
right,
could I could get in the water, or I could go in the bathroom, take off the bathing suit, and just have the cover up on, so you don't see the bathing suit,
right,
and sit at one of the tables so it looks like I'm in by my pool,
right. I do love that.
which would be actually very David Lynch of
I
me.
was just going to say, of all of the interviews we could be having, it's this one. Be
I know it
perfect.
actually works, right?
Yeah, it'd be excellent.
Yeah, so maybe that is what I'm going to do.
So yeah, let me know when you want to, when you need to do that so we can
Well,
give,
probably like 10 more minutes.
okay.
I mean, now I just
Um,
wish I would have stayed there.
oh, God,
I know.
unnerve.
Instead, I'm standing by the fountain staring at my
Not at all creepy.
house. No, not at all.
This is Why, with your hosts, Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling.
Congratulations on the book. It's
Thanks.
lovely to look at, lovely to hold. How long did it take you to put it together?
I mean, it was the work of most of last year, essentially. So I think everything was commissioned and agreed sort of February-ish of last year, and then I got to work writing, which took most of last year, and kind of at the same time was looking for pictures that the photo team at Quarto and Francis Lincoln could use, and just kind of it took the better part of a year, and then obviously we'd finished. The first draft was done, it was all signed off. I was working on a second, and the picture research was kind of 99% there, and then he passed away in January, so that was obviously a bit of a shock, and
Yeah.
necessitated a certain amount of rewriting and rethinking. But yeah, the process was about the work of a year. Yeah.
And what is your personal relationship with Lynch? When did you get into the films? Obviously, as a film writer and critic, you have to watch these things, but I'm assuming he's one of those filmmakers who it's sort of like you're rubbing your hands together going, great, a new David Lynch movie.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. A new David Lynch anything.
Right.
Um, I My first memory of Lynch is seeing Dune as a kid. So my dad was a bit of a Frank Herbert fan. He was a bit of a Dune fan. Gave me the book to read when I was much too young, and we watched the film together on VHS. I guess I probably would have been about 11 or 12. Certainly a little young for the nastier bits, which I remember finding really quite upsetting. The heart plug scene in particular really quite upset me at that age. But I was one of those kids who kind of noticed names in credits, and kind of stored that information away. And so I knew David Lynch's name kind of stuck with me. And then obviously Twin Peaks came out in the US in 1990 and in the UK in 1991. So I would have been 15, exactly the right age.
Mm.
Mhm.
And I think there must have been some kind of advance word, because I was certainly in front of the TV for the pilot episode when it screened over here in 91. And yeah, I just became completely addicted to it, as did everyone in my class at school. We were all obsessed with it. They played seasons 1 and 2 back to back over here. The whole thing just ran straight through. So
Mm.
just a kind of 30 episode, a 30-week obsession that took over probably a lot of classes. So yeah, and then from there, I must have seen Blue Velvet pretty soon after seeing the pilot episode of Twin Peaks. I would have seen Wild at Heart because that was out around the same time. And yeah, so it was an early thing, and Twin Peaks kind of became a bit of an obsession for me when I went to university and I was away from home long term for the first time. They just started replaying Twin Peaks on TV, and I remember it felt more. It kind of felt like a home from home to me, rewatching that series, and I would rewatch it again and again. And it was kind of a safe space for me, even though there was all this, murder and violence. It was nonetheless a very safe space.
Ever cosplay as any of the characters? You
Yeah,
got a Dr. Jacoby kind of thing going, is what I'm thinking.
yeah, no, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I had it. I put on a Twin Peaks party at a friend's house. I can't remember when, 20 years ago now, and I went as Philip Gerard as the one-armed man, which was the easiest costume in the world because all I needed to do was wear a suit jacket and have one arm strapped across my chest. So yeah, that was fine. Later, I got to meet Al Strobel, and he taught me how to talk backwards at the Twin Peaks UK Festival and all that kind of stuff. So that was a real
Mm.
dream come true. He also gave me a T-shirt with his face on it and signed it for me, which is one of my prized possessions now.
As well it should be. Yeah. So this is all we're all talking about, just fandom and watching this stuff and going, I really like this. This just resonates with me. W- When did you start writing about him? Or is this the first time you really sat down and tried to sort of explore his work in a little bit deeper way as you would with other filmmakers?
No, not at all. I mean, the first film writing job I did, I was kind of in my late 20s. I was sort of off work for medical reasons and started kind of doing bits of film writing for, just to keep myself occupied. I'd been working kind of odd, bookshop jobs and that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And I started doing a bit of film writing, and I wrote for a website called Not Coming to a Theatre Near You, which was based in the US. And I was in the UK, but I emailed them and sent them some samples of my work, and they ran it. It was all volunteer. There was no money involved. One of the first pieces that I wrote for them was quite a long review of Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And it was still in that period where the film hadn't quite been reclaimed yet. It was still seen as kind of a black sheep in Lynch's catalogue. So I wrote this very impassioned defense. And it was one of the first pieces that I'd written, maybe even the first film piece that I wrote, where I really felt like I'd got something, like I'd expressed myself in the way that I wanted to, like maybe this was something that I could do professionally. And then not long after that, I started working at Time Out. It was one of the pieces that I submitted for my job application at Time Out in London. I'd never done any professional film writing before to get paid for. So they took a bit of a chance on me, and I wrote about Lynch every chance I got from then on. Myself and my colleague David Jenkins did a 50 David Lynch characters piece. I would just include his work wherever I could. Essentially, I got to interview the man, only over the phone, sadly, but it was for I think 40th anniversary Blu-ray of The Elephant Man, which obviously was shot and filmed in London. I was working for Time Out London, so it was a good fit, and we got to talk about his experiences, which were fairly wild and fairly unpleasant for him at the time, I think. But talk about shooting in London, and it's one of the great London movies, and you can still visit. A lot of the locations have been torn down and destroyed in the years since, but there are a few you can still go and see. So we got to talk about that. It was my one chat with him, and it was really everything that you would want from a talk with David Lynch. He was just super enthusiastic and positive.
What
I'm
did it
sorry?
feel like when you hung up the phone?
It felt amazing, really. Yeah, it was quite early on in my career at Time Out, and I kind of I was suddenly speaking to all these people that I would, admired enormously. Lynch being very much at the top of the list, but I remember in the first year or two that I was there, I got to talk to Neil Young.
Oh,
He'd released a documentary, and so I got to talk to him about kind of documentary filmmaking. I got to talk to Corey Feldman, who
oh
was
my gosh.
kind of
I
10 or
would love to
11
touch
years
her.
old, was just my complete idol. Like his
You're naming
performance
the
was
wish list of this show, by the
I
way.
know you
yeah,
really are.
yeah. The Goonies and Stand By Me were huge films for me as a kid. So getting to
Yes.
talk to him was wild. And then
Mhm.
Lynch was kind of, the icing on the cake. So yeah, it was really wonderful. And it was funny. A friend of mine, who was a performance artist, she was obsessed with David Lynch in way more seriously than I was. Like I loved his work, but she, thought about him all the time, and his work fed into her art and all this kind of thing. And just as I got to talk to him, she was about to start a course of transcendental meditation, largely because Lynch was so passionate about it.
Of course.
And I got to tell
Yes.
him, I got to say this to him, and I said, Lynch, a friend of mine, is starting. She's about to start transcendental meditation. Can you give her like a little, something to help her along the way? And he obviously just went into this epic spiel about how it was going to transform her life. And I got to play this tape for her, and she obviously cried for about half an hour.
Yes, of course.
So that was a lovely thing, and he was obviously really happy to do it, and yeah, it was a wonderful thing.
That's
I only wish I'd got to speak to him again and meet him in person, but it was
Yeah.
it was lovely to have that little half hour.
Oh yeah, those moments are so amazing. And when I think about that so often with our show, we get those same gifts where we get, although we haven't had those three, and obviously we won't get him, but that I feel so fortunate. It's always we get so like excited when we get those people, and then you
Yeah,
have the moments and you're so excited, but I that when we hang up, it's that moment when it ends, that feeling of
yeah,
just what I feel so fortunate that I get to look at Luke across the screen and go, what what just
yeah.
happened? It's just
That
the most
happened. Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah.
yeah,
It's just so great. Ah, that's
yeah.
awesome.
And
What stands out for you? Was there anything as you did the book, especially because you had to kind of rework it and look at it from a different angle? Is there anything that stands out for you in the book as the part of it that just jumps out as the one sort of special chapter, picture, section that just is sort of like the special piece close to your heart more than anything
Yeah,
else?
it was really nice writing about Twin Peaks: The Return, actually, because because it's so recent, relatively recent, that there hasn't been a huge amount of writing about it, and obviously I'm aware that there have been multiple books about Lynch, many of them much more academic and higher brow than mine. So it was really nice to talk about The Return and to remember that period when it was first announced and how amazingly exciting it was and how incredible it was to sit down and watch it. And I'd already written that whole section, and I talked about how, whether or not he was planning new work, it nonetheless felt like a swan song. There are threads that lead back to every single thing that he'd ever done. There are elements of every one of his projects, not just films, but shorts and TV and music and art and even his furniture and everything. It just felt like this enormous summation of everything that he'd done. And it's 18 hours long. It's nearly as long as his entire filmography put together. It's wild.
Right.
So that getting to write about this kind of, I mean, series of books could be written about that series, I think. So getting to write about that was a real pleasure, and just kind of picking through it to find the little threads that go back to his earlier work. And I just the other night, I screened Eraserhead as a kind of book launch. My partner runs a cinema, a movie theater just down the road from where we live, and So I got to launch the book there, and we screened Eraserhead with an intro from that I did, and it was amazing how many people came up afterwards and said there was a tree in there that looked exactly like the evolution of the arm in Twin Peaks: The Return, and it's true. There are these tree sculptures in the background in Eraserhead that look exactly like the kind of pulsating tree brain in Twin Peaks: The Return. So all of this stuff, just picking out all these threads is really exciting. So yeah, I think that was my favorite bit to write.
And you came to his work, saying coming in with Dune at what most people think is his, least Lynchian, the one he had the least control over. Um,
Yeah.
is there any of his projects, be it the records or anything else that you covered in the book, that you sort of not necessarily rediscovered, but sort of were like, oh, I was really underestimating this, or kind of like treating it as not as good as that, or maybe just people in general are sort of like, this is, A minus Lynch versus, A plus. Is there anything like that?
It was interesting to see the straight story in the context, because I rewatched everything,
Hmm.
and not necessarily in order, but to see the straight story kind of in the context of everything that's going on around it, and to recognize, because obviously it was treated at the time as, oh, this is an un-Lynchian David Lynch project, and I think that's nonsense. It it starts with a drifting starfield, which is the most David Lynch, or it ends with one. I can't remember. It's the opening shot or the closing shot, but and it's all about it's all about family and the way people relate to each other, and it's about people on quests that they haven't fully comprehended before they set out on them. There are a ton of Lynchian themes in there. So yeah, it was really interesting to see that movie in context, and also to realize that in a funny sort of way, it was the last film that he made. Um, you know, Mulholland Drive was shot
Yeah.
shortly afterwards, but it was completed piecemeal. Inland Empire was shot in pieces. Twin Peaks: The Return was made for TV. So the straight story is kind of the final movie that he made that was just a movie that was shot using a script and actors and made in the traditional way and distributed in the traditional way and all that kind of stuff. It was kind of his last film in a funny sort of way. So yeah, it was really interesting to revisit that film. I mean, I loved it when it came out, and I love it now. Particularly the Badalamenti score, I think, is as good as anything he did. But yeah, it was really interesting to revisit that one.
Hmm. It's the other thing the interesting thing about it is that I feel like he is one of the few filmmakers where both he is equally strong with dialogue and with the screenplay, and then visually as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people are good at one or the other, or some are good at neither. Um,
True. Fair.
but do you think that comes from his? I mean, it must have come from his art background and working continuously as a painter and doing other pieces. Um, how big? I mean, I'm assuming that's a pretty big influence, you think, on his work and his outlook on life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he saw the two things as quite separate, and he treated the two things as quite separate. But he used his art to tell stories a lot of the time. He would talk about having a little story in his art, and there were often words included in the artwork. And obviously, the films are very painterly, like particularly kind of The Elephant Man, Blue Velvet, Fire Walk with Me, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive. They're just very, very beautiful films. Um, so yeah, I think his art definitely did. I think it was very much a two-way street. It's interesting that you talk about how good his dialogue was. I don't think I talk about it in the book. I don't think he ever saw himself as a writer. I don't think he was someone who was comfortable with words. But I do think his dialogue is beautiful, and I think his song lyrics are beautiful too.
Mm.
There's a bluntness to to the lyrics and to the dialogue. You know, there's the famous kind of moment from Blue Velvet where Jeffrey says, you know, why are there people like Frank? Why is there so much bad in the world? And you know, there is a certain bluntness to a lot of the dialogue, but I think that in itself is really poetic. And when you read the lyrics to, I mean, Badalamenti famously said, when David Lynch first offered, you know, when they first agreed to work together on Mysteries of Love, the song they wrote together for Blue Velvet, David Lynch went off and he wrote these lyrics to give to Badalamenti, and he gave them to him, and Badalamenti said, these are the worst fucking lyrics I've ever read in my life. But when you hear them in context, it just works, you know.
Right.
When you hear them sung by Julie Cruz with that, you know, drifty, drony, beautiful synthy music in the background, those words work. And I think context is everything. But yeah, I don't think he was ever comfortable necessarily with himself as a writer. But I think he's a beautiful writer. I really do. I think he was a poet.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I think is interesting with him, and there's a few other artists of different ilks that have this, um, partially whatever he did was never surprising. Whether it was, you know, Wild at Heart with the sort of Wizard of Ozian thing, or sitting on, was it Sunset with the cow and the giant poster campaigning
Yeah,
for Laura Dern, or
yeah,
Bob's Big Boy, or just his weather reports during the pandemic.
Right.
yeah.
Do you think that was truly him? Was that his personality, or do you think that was part of an artifice and a character he created that happened to be named David Lynch?
I go back and forth on it. You know, in the very, you know, the introduction to to the book is entitled "A Real Character," which is a lift from Twin Peaks. You know, James says my Aunt Nadine, she's a real character. Um, and you know, I think he was real and a character. And I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive.
Right.
I think the person that he appeared to be was exactly who he was. I think he was completely unlike anyone else. I think he was very aware of the persona that he put out, and that it was crafted to a certain extent. But equally, you know, yeah, it's a really difficult one. You know, how much of any of us is real and how much is what we craft. You know,
Hmm.
it's impossible to say. Um, Obviously, Lynch's character, the character that he put across, was more extreme than most of us. But you know, I think he was probably a more extreme person than most of us are. In just, you know, in the way he was kind of put together mentally and emotionally, and yeah. So yeah, I think it's a difficult question to answer. I certainly don't think there was anything. I think artifice is the wrong word. I think artificial is the wrong way to look at it. I think it was crafted, and I think it was who he was comfortable being to some extent. Because, as I said, I think he was quite uncomfortable with words.
Hmm.
So I think that he used this character to some extent as a shield. But equally, I think it was who he was. Yeah. And I think that one of the reasons people love him so much is because of that persona. And
Mhm.
I think it really appealed to people, and that openness that he seemed to have, and that kind of enthusiasm for everything, and, you know, particularly creativity, and that idea that anyone could be creative, and that you know, everything that you do is equally valid, creatively speaking. And you know, that anyone who creates is a friend of mine, was one of his great quotes. And yeah, I think that just really appealed to people, and particularly creative people, and people felt comfortable with him and felt like he was someone that they could get along with, which I think is a real gift to people, you know. And I think he probably knew that too, and that was another reason why he did it. I think he was probably quite generous in that way.
Yeah. There was like a warmth about him in spite of
Yeah,
all of that, which was amazing.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, he came across as a very kind of warm and approachable guy, and
Mhm.
certainly, you know, the extraordinarily brief time that I spent chatting to him, that's certainly how he came across.
It's interesting you're saying the fact that Twin Peaks: The Return feels like the culmination of a body of work and subconscious, maybe wrapping up of his character.
Yeah.
Do you know if he was working on anything else cinematically or with television post that?
I mean, I know there were a number of projects being talked about. I mean, it was what, almost 10 years between the return and when he died, or just, I can't remember, around a decade anyway.
Yeah.
I know that he had been talking about making an animated feature called
Oh my
Snoop World,
God.
which was for kids, which was first pitched in the early 2000s. He'd written a script with the co-writer of The Nightmare Before Christmas. I'm afraid I can't remember her name. But that had been shopped around a bit. Netflix had certainly turned it down, unfortunately. I think that's one of those ones that I could imagine might still get made by somebody. There was a TV series that just came up recently. A script for it was in the auction, I think, a couple of months ago. He'd been working on a documentary about the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi for 20 odd years, shot reams of footage, interviews, and was certainly still working on the edit for that in the last 10 years of his life. I have no idea how close it was to completion. I mean, obviously, last year he admitted to Sight and Sound that he had severe emphysema brought on by years of smoking, and that with COVID being in the populace, that actually being on a film set would be quite dangerous for him. So he might, he talked about working remotely. He said it wasn't something that he relished doing, but that if it was that or nothing, then he would give it a try. So yes, there were certainly lots of projects floating about. I don't think that he thought that Twin Peaks: The Return was the last thing he was going to do. In fact, at I think the penultimate Twin Peaks UK festival, I was on stage with Sabrina Sutherland, who was his sort of long time exec producer and sort of general, second person, go-to person. And I said to her, as far back as that, The Return feels like a culmination of something. Could this possibly be the last thing that he does? And she reacted quite angrily, actually. She was like, no, absolutely not. David's working on new material, all of this stuff. So yeah. The other thing that he talked about was some kind of continuation of The Return, whether it was, I think he talked about focusing on the character that Cheryl Lee plays in the final episode, who is and isn't Laura Palmer, Carrie Page. Because when Cooper walks in, there's a dead body in the corner of her room. So I guess there was a lot to explore with that character. So yeah, I think he was still full of ideas.
I noticed while in doing some research for this conversation, I noticed you contributed to the BFI with your list of films, your 10
Yeah.
favorite films.
Yeah.
I someday hope to do the same, yet also possess great fear that as soon as I hit send on that email, I would be like, actually, no, wait, let me fix this. Let me take this back. Did you have that? And if you could do 12, 11 even, is there anything you would add to that list? I mean, it's a good list. No shame to that, certainly.
It was certainly whittled down from at least 30. I mean, I have a letterboxd list of my 1,000 favorite movies if anyone wants to go and check that out. But yeah,
I will be doing
the
that
final,
momentarily. Yes.
some of them are absurd, but most of them are absolutely supposed to be there. Yeah, no, I'd whittled it down from about 30. That it was actually choosing the Lynch was one of the toughies. It was between The Elephant Man and Fire Walk with Me, right down to the wire. But Fire Walk with Me is just a film that the whole thing ended up being personal. That was what I went with. I took out ones where my feelings were more of respect than love, essentially.
Hmm.
And went with the ones that I deeply love. So yeah, that was kind of, I can't remember what the last one that got dropped was. It's Eric, I can't even remember if Eric Romer's The Green Ray made it. If it
Did
didn't, that
not.
was right. Well, that was the last one to get cut then.
Interesting. Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it's such like it's a nice, because I have the same thing when people ask you, you want like, I want to have a diversity to it. I want to have
right.
some more popular stuff, some that's a little bit, the sort of desert island disc of it all.
Yeah.
And you kind of got it all. You've got your Russian filmmaker, you've got your Coppola, your Blade Runner, your Powell and Pressburger. Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very nice list and very nice
Thank you.
book as well. David Lynch, His Work, His World by Tom Huddleston is available right now from Francis Lincoln Publishers, wherever you get your books.
Nigel, is that you? Are you here, Nigel?